So what is it that you are doing to avoid becoming arrogant? Your current situation is very inviting for that. Yeah, well, I would say a good dose of existential terror will cure you that. You know, there's a saying in the Old Testament that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. And like, first of all, and there's some real truth in that, you know, like I don't want to make a mistake. And so I live in constant terror that I'm going to utter some damning phrase that's going to sink everything I've done. And so I'll tell you, if you feel that way about the situation, then the probability that you're going to be arrogant is pretty damn low. And like, I don't feel I have any reason to be arrogant, you know. Like, here's something you could do if you're really interested in this, but it's really hard. There's a paper by Carl Jung called The Relations Between the Ego and the Unconscious. And it's an unbelievably brilliant paper. It's very difficult to understand, but it has to do with what Jung called ego inflation. And so imagine that as you move up a hierarchy of authority or competence, we're not going to call them dominance or power hierarchies because I don't think that's reasonable. But as you move up, you know, you have the temptation of having your ego inflate to match your hypothetical position of status. But what that is in some sense the taking on of the archetype as if it's a personal triumph or a personal construct or a personal invention. And Jung warned very, very strongly against that. And he knew what he was talking about because, of course, Jung had his followers and was an extraordinarily powerful man from a spiritual and a physical perspective. He was certainly no pushover and a very brave person. And he had the temptation of becoming, well, a cult leader, for example, which people have accused him of being, and which he certainly wasn't. And he knew that, you know, if you have the privilege of rising in a hierarchy, what that means, if the rising is real, is that the archetype is operating through you, and that you can't take credit for that. You have to separate your personality in some sense from the archetype. I can give you a funny example of that. It's like, and I hope that nobody takes this wrong, but it's very comical. You know how all the superheroes have an alter ego? So you can't be Superman unless you're also Clark Kent, and you can't be, well, Batman isn't such a good example because he gets to be a playboy billionaire like Iron Man, but Superman's a better example. You know, he's this mild-mannered and meek reporter, and without that he can't be Superman. It's like, well, that's the reason that's such a well-established comic trope is because comics are deeply mythological, and there's the idea there that the person has these two elements. One is the archetypal, and it's associated with the infinite. It's like the God in man, you could say that. There's a great icon, by the way, of Christ as Pantocrator, one of the very earliest icons that show him with two different facial halves. The eyes are different, and the face is asymmetrical, and one face is the face of God, half face is the half face of God, and the other is the half face of man, and he's holding a book. I'm having Jonathan Pageau, who's a brilliant carver, I'm having him carve me that image so that I can put it in my front porch because I love it, and Christ is holding a book. And so, you know, it's such a beautiful image, this idea of man as a duality between the finite and the infinite, and simultaneously holding forth this, you know, wealth of knowledge that's been gathered by the human race. It's mind expanding visual imagery. Anyways,